Okay, so figurative sculpture throughout history. We're going to kind of touch on different moments in time and different moments in history, some pivotal pieces, some pivotal areas, so that you can see the evolution sort of from start to finish here. I love to talk about this. Sculpture is one of my favorite art forms. I love mixed media sculpture. I love ceramic sculpture, and especially the figure. It's so easy and exciting to bring your own human experience into a sculpture. So we're going to start way back in Egypt here. We've got Menkaure and his wife, 2515 BC, which stands for before Christ. So this is before the year zero. This is made out of slate, so it's carved out of an entire block of slate. So you can actually imagine like the block of slate around these two figures. So let's talk about some of the elements that we see in these figures that are pretty prominent. We see them both facing forward. We don't see a whole lot of gesture in their bodies. They're really stiff looking. They're very Egyptian in their form. So we're seeing that triangular shape where the top of the triangle is the shoulders. Even in the female form, we see this. Very smooth surfaces. We're not seeing a whole lot of variety of textures yet, right? Because carving on the stone is really quite complicated. So lots of smooth. We see the male stepping forward. So this is for balance. The female's doing it a little bit as well, to hold the figure up, but also because it shows his authority or his hierarchy over her, because he is sort of stepping forward. But there is a little bit of a gesture in this figurative combo here. We have a little bit of an intimate moment here. She's putting her hand on his arm, and she's got her other hand kind of wrapped around his waist. So it shows that they're connected, that they're a married couple, that they have a relationship. The Great Sphinx in Giza, Egypt, 2570 to 2544 BC. This is carved out of sandstone, so the sandstone that is already part of the landscape. This is 65 feet tall, so you can imagine the amount of work and time and effort it took to carve this. And we're not dealing with scaffolding or cranes or anything like that, right? The people that were carving this Sphinx were climbing the rocks and carving into the stone. This is definitely on my bucket list. We've seen her before, Queen Nefertiti, 1348 to 1336 BC. This is carved out of limestone. It's 19 inches tall. There's a drastic, radical leap between this and the original, picture that we just looked at here. So we go back to these two guys here, or this Menkaure and his wife here. Very, very different. So we're starting to see more realism. We're starting to see more freer standing figures. She is very straight still. She's very stoic. But we're starting to see some color on the limestone, and some exaggeration of the features. Like her neck is obviously probably a little bit longer than it was in real life, to give her a sense of grace and power. So now we're kind of going into archaic or ancient Greece architecture and sculpture. Left we have the Koros, or standing youth. We're still seeing a lot of Egyptian features here, actually. We're seeing the legs stepping forward. We're seeing that triangular shaped body. We're seeing not a lot of texture. Maybe a little bit in the hair is showing up. And this is carved out of marble. So you can see down here in the corner, this is what marble looks like before it's carved. On the right here we have Kor and Dorian Peplos, 530 BC. This is also marble, 48 inches tall. It's carved about a century after this one on the left here. But it still resembles Egyptian traits, right? But the drapery is added and the hair is falling over her shoulders organically. So we're starting to see some clothes and some more fluid carving. So now we're jumping into 478 BC. This is the Charioteer of Delphi. This is probably one of the finest examples of this time period of a bronze sculpture. And this is cast from stone. So it was originally carved out of stone, and then there was a mold that was made around it, and then liquid bronze was poured into this mold, making a cast of the stone sculpture. So we're starting to see that process, which really changed sculpture for in a lot of ways, because now we can replicate a sculpture and we can put it in multiple places. You might see a lot of classical Greek sculpture and sculptures of the figure missing limbs, right, or missing parts of their face. Of course, that was not what the sculpture looked like originally. Just over time and through the process of going through wars, these sculptures lose their limbs because they're the things that are sticking out. But you can see that he was once holding the reins of some horses. This is a very famous sculpture. You might have seen it depicted in multiple ways, or maybe you've even been to the Louvre in Paris. If you have, you're super lucky because it's pretty amazing. This Nike of Samothrace, she was placed on the head of a ship. She was sort of the angel that was guiding the ship to safety. 200, 190 BC, carved out of marble. I want to ask you guys, I'm going to back up a little bit here and ask you, what are some of the elements of this sculpture that are way, way, way different than maybe some of the Egyptian pieces or the ancient Greek pieces that we just looked at? What are some of the elements that are different? James?
It has more texture and more detail to it.
More texture and more detail, definitely. Any other elements that seem different? Lizzie?
I was gonna say that there's like more clothing, I felt like, and like the dress, you can see all like the little like creases and how it like shapes around her body.
Exactly. So her dress is more elaborate. There's more folds. It's moving. You can tell maybe there's some wind blowing on her body. Someone else had something to say.
Well, I was gonna say, someone also put it in the chat, but like, there's more like movement in her pose. Like she isn't kind of just like standing like still, kind of straight up. It's more of like a fluid motion.
Exactly. She looks like I mean, you've seen Titanic, right? So she looks like she's the girl on the head of the ship, and she's letting the wind blow her dress.
Yeah.
And you can actually see her stomach and her belly button through her dress. So that shows you how much the wind is blowing on her, right? She's not wearing like a contemporary outfit that would show her midriff. These are her clothes being blown against her. She also has a fantastical element, right? She doesn't have arms, she has wings. And at one point, I really wish that we had her head, because I'm really curious what her expression looks like. I want to know what her face is doing. Okay, let's go back to presentation mode here. I have been to the Louvre. I was a nanny in France for a period of time, and when the kids were at school, I got to go explore. So I did spend some time at the Louvre. This sculpture is actually another giant leap into the realm of amazing sculpture here. This is Laocoon and his sons, 180 to 160 BC. A Trojan priest of Poseidon, Laocoon and his sons, being attacked by a sea serpent. This is 7 feet tall, so it's life size, but it's a little smaller than life size, because this figure, you would imagine if this figure were life size that he'd probably be like a 6-7 foot tall. I don't know. It seems smaller in real life than it really is, even though it's 7 foot tall. It's almost life size. Another strange thing about it is that, he is the father. These are his sons, but his sons almost look like they have adult male bodies as well, but they're shrunk. They're like half his size. So that's fascinating. Now, I want you for a second to imagine this is a big block of marble, just a block of marble. The artist had to chip away at this and create all of this negative space, and had to sculpt this entire snake, just imagining and knowing that they were pulling all of this marble out of this block to create all of this negative space. Incredibly difficult to do, right? And also very nerve-wracking, because all you have to do is chip it wrong and you've lost this part of the snake and you can never get it back. There's no gluing this back together, really. You do see, of course, the hands are missing, parts of the feet and whatnot from wear and tear over time. But look at the detail in the beard, in the hair, the fabric, the snake, everything. The expressions on their faces, super, super emotional. This is Constantine the Great, Roman Emperor from 306 to 337 AD. This head is 8 feet tall. This was once an entire sculpture, the entire figure, and it sat in the apse of the Constantine's Basilica right here. So just imagine taking a piece of stone that is what? If the head is 8 feet tall, a head is 1/8 of the height of a body. So 24 to 30 feet tall piece of, stone, and carving an entire figure out of that. We just don't see work like this now. We really don't. This is amazing, amazing stuff. Emperor Augustus, 27 BC to 14 AD. So now we're spanning that, we're overlapping, going over that 0 period, right? The year of the Lord, as if you use the terms BC and AD, we're talking about that kind of timeline. If you don't want to refer to that this way, you can say BCE, which is before the Common Era, and then CE, which is the Common Era, instead of BC and AD. So we're starting to span 27 up to 0 and then 14. So now we're going up in numbers. So this emperor represents a god or a divine ruler. So now we're starting to see emperors tapping into the mythology of the time period to show themselves as powerful, powerful emperors. So Augustus saw himself as a god or a ruler, a divine ruler. And then he also has Cupid down by his foot riding a dolphin, which is really funny to me, symbolizing Venus's patron animal. This implies that Augustus was the descendant of Venus. So there's this belief built into the sculpture. So now we're jumping way forward, right? We went from 14 to 1395. Why did I skip all this stuff? Because I could talk about this for 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours. So I just kind of jumped forward and looked for examples that could show you the evolution of the carving, right? So now we're starting to see carving and sculptures that actually have artist names associated with them instead of just a group of people working on a sculpture or someone commissioning work for religious spaces or for emperors. So this artist's name was Sluter. He was Netherlandish of origin, and we're starting to see a lot more texture, gesture, fabric, belts, staffs, angels, wings, feathers, all of these things getting much more detailed. Also wanted to show you some examples of folk artists, so artists that are not traditionally educated in the realm of proportion and how to carve marble and whatnot. We're seeing these carved out of wood. This is the Pieta, or the Mother Mary and Jesus off the cross. And we're seeing just a lot of emotion and detail still, right? But the proportions are kind of off. And I love folk art. I think it's really fascinating because it really shows you what that group of people, what they were experiencing in their life or thinking. It's really quite a personal, regional expression, I think, of art. Okay, so now we're jumping into the European Renaissance, 14th through 16th century. We're seeing a cultural change and achievement marking the shift from medieval to modern Europe. This is Della Robbia, extremely famous sculptor. This is the Cantoria, or singing gallery, for the Cathedral of Florence. So this is children singing. This is not a sculpture in the round. This is a giant block of marble, and it's carved in relief. So this is a really good example of high relief. So these children in the foreground with the book, they're almost fully in the round. So we still can't see the back. And then in the children in the middle ground are sort of kind of disappearing into the background, and then the children in the background are just sort of faint carvings. So low, medium, and high relief. And of course, the David, Michelangelo's the David. A little detail about him that I love sharing with you guys is that he was 25 years old when he sculpted this. So that's not far off from where you guys are in terms of age. So that's kind of amazing to think about. So this is Italian High Renaissance. So there was a competition for who was going to sculpt this David between Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. And Michelangelo won, and this is the result. So you might have seen this. This is in Florence, Italy. It's absolutely stunning. You can see the size of it. You're looking at the size of the figures here. The stand makes it look bigger than it is too, because it's really elevated when you walk around it. Something notable to look at in terms of sculpture are the hands. I wish I had a kind of a detailed shot of his hands. This hand in particular is just carved with a lot of detail. Really quite beautiful. And he's exaggerated. He's an exaggerated youth. This is a young boy. David is a young boy. So I wanted to show you more examples, different angles here, of the David sculpture. So this is Donatello's David for 1430 CE. So this is a previous depiction of David. This one shows David standing over the head of Goliath. So this is a story in the Bible where David chops off the head of this giant Goliath. And so in this sculpture, you can see him standing on the head of Goliath, and he's very androgynous. He's also kind of effeminate as well. And then also Verrocchio's David a little bit later, same thing, young boy, somewhat androgynous, and the head of Goliath down by his feet. So, question: why do you think Michelangelo didn't include the head of Goliath? Why is Michelangelo's David different than Donatello's David and Verrocchio's David? Any thoughts on why they might have depicted him much different, more different? Why Michelangelo might have depicted him differently? We could go back to this example here, right? The emperor using a god to represent himself. So you might want to think about who is commissioning this piece? Where is it? What is it saying about the culture? What is it saying about the person that commissioned it? Is it representative of something other than the story of David and Goliath? So these are questions to ask yourself when you're viewing sculpture and making sculpture. All right. So I'm going to speed up just a little bit so we have time to focus on something else. This is Bernini. This is the sculpture itself is called the Ecstasy of St. Teresa. Here's some close-up shots of it. This is an incredible space. This marble sculpture is right in the middle of the cathedral, up at the altar area. And he was the leading sculptor of his time period. And he not only sculpted this for this chapel, but he designed the interior and did all the paintings for it. And we're seeing some amazing fabric here. And we're also seeing some incredibly delicate and gestural hands. And she represents, so this woman here, this angel up here that's kind of coming down, she's about to pierce the heart of Teresa, St. Teresa. And this flaming arrow represents the pain and suffering of life and the love she feels for God. So that is the reason why it's titled The Ecstasy of St. Teresa, because we see this look on her face, and we see all of this beautiful flowing fabric that looks kind of like water. All right, so now we're jumping way ahead, and we're going to talk a little bit about Rodin, Auguste Rodin, and also Camille Claudel. Rodin is considered the father of modern sculpture. Camille Claudel was his assistant and lover. He sculpted The Thinker, 1840 to 1917. This is a nice quote that I think defines and places him in the time period really well because he was making work around the time that Manet was painting and Monet was painting his water lilies. By insisting on this unfinishedness, he rescued sculpture from mechanical reproduction, just as Manet rescued painting from photographic realism. So Rodin is starting to leave parts of the stone in there, and he's using it as part of the sculpture for metaphorical reasons. This is a bronze cast of the thinker. There's lots of them in the world. I've seen them before. If you've ever been to the Stanford University's campus in Palo Alto, California, there's a Rodin sculpture garden, and you'll find the thinker there, you'll find the gates of hell there, and lots of other sculptures from him. So what can we say about this? If you go and look at it really close, you'll see that it's bumpy, right? There's like a texture to it. There's an expressive texture to the surface of these figures, and they're very exaggerated. The hands are larger than life. The head is larger than life. The gestures are exaggerated. I can't remember. I need to rewatch this video. But these gates, these are doors, and I don't know if they ever functioned as doors. But it's called the Gates of Hell, and it's talking about Dante's Inferno. So we have the three shades, which is part of the story, up here at the top. We have the thinker, which sits in the realm of the reality up here, right? This is sort of intellectual human thought. And then down below we have hell. And we have all of these people writhing in pain and suffering and kind of like trying to escape the primordial ooze. It's a really intense piece. If you want to learn more about it, you can watch this video. We're going to skip it for now. And then the story of Camille Claudel, there's actually a movie out about her. It's an older movie. I think it was made in the 60s or something. But it's kind of a tragic story, as a lot of women artist stories are in this time period. She wasn't allowed to study, so she started a studio space with a bunch of other women, and they were just practicing. Making these sculptures and practicing. And Rodin came and he visited the studio space, and he saw her work, and he asked her to be his assistant. And then, of course, that turned into them being, lovers, and he was married, so that, of course, that was controversial. But she was his assistant for a really long time. And then, sadly, she ended up in a mental health institution. And for a lot of reasons I don't know, but I'm assuming that it's probably just part of not being able to really be the artist that she wanted to be. But we're going to look at some of her sculptures and see how great her work is. This is a Rodin piece. This is called the Danaids. It's a Greek myth where we have 50 daughters were sent to marry the 50 sons of Danaus's twin brothers. He told them to kill their husbands on their wedding night. And the ones that did not were punished and sentenced to fill these water jugs that had holes in them for eternity. So it's sort of like the punishment is just this endless labor that is not benefiting anybody. So Rodin's piece here, you can see the woman is kind of draped over the landscape, and her hair is kind of flowing like water. And then you have this broken jug the water's flowing out of it, and kind of all around and sort of melting into her hair. And you can see there are parts of her body that are kind of stuck in the stone. So she seems very trapped. So you can see how he might take this beautiful sort of Greek myth and turn it into something very narrative. Here's some more reviews of the sculpture. 1902. So turn of the century. This is also one of his famous pieces. This is called The Kiss. This is also at the Louvre, or maybe it's at the Rodin Museum. I can't remember which one, but I've seen it in real life. They're a little bit larger than life size, and it's just a really beautiful sculpture. Especially I like this hand on her hip there. You can see it sort of press into her hip, so it's just very realistically carved. This one kind of shows his ego. This is called the hand of God, but this hand is his hand. So he's basically saying, because I can sculpt like this and create these human forms out of stone, I am godlike. And so he's got inside of his hand, he's got a sculpture that he's carving. He loved hands. There's a lot of hands in his work. This one's called the Lover's Hands. You can see the size of these too, because that's a person in the gallery. This is a bust of Rodin sculpted by Camille Claudel. This is a bust of Camille sculpted by Rodin. And this is also a bust of Camille sculpted by Rodin. I think this piece is really fascinating because I don't know if it's unfinished or if it's intentional. If it's intentional, he's sort of saying that she was stuck inside this block. But if it was not finished and unintentional, then I think that's a different story. This is Camille Claudel's The Kiss. So look at the difference between the two, right? In her version, the female is up on this stump and the male is sort of adoring her. And, you know, his version is, I'd say, equal. I don't feel as though the male is is dominant in this image. But you can, you know, have your own opinions about that. This is a much smaller piece. She did not have the backing and the notoriety and the money to sculpt life size. If there's a couple sculptures of hers like this one, but for the most part, most of her pieces are smaller. This one's amazing. I've seen this one in real life too. I think it's at the Rodin. There is a Camille Claudel section of the Rodin Museum in Paris. This one's called Maturity. So we see this male figure, and then it's hard to see this part, but this is the angel of death, and he's carrying him away. And then we see this younger woman kind of reaching for him. This is a small piece by Camille, probably a study for a larger piece, but this is a group of women. It's sort of in a cave, talking and gossiping and, you know, communing. Okay, so now we went from, you know, early 1900s to jumping all the way up to the 1990s. So we skipped a lot, but I did want to show you some contemporary ceramic pieces. You might have seen this one. We talked about tiptoeing in our attendance check-in today. This one is at the Crocker, this little girl with the donut. Have you guys seen that? She's standing in front of a platform and a wall of wallpaper. This piece on the right actually was in a show with Tiptoeing at an NCCA, which is the clay conference in Philadelphia. So I've seen this piece in person. It's life size, and she has all these little puppets on her fingers, and they're really funny. They're sort of scary monsters. Here you can see there's a monkey here and a little scary ghost, and some baby faces. I wanted to say one thing about her work. She doesn't glaze her pieces. She uses airbrush paint, acrylic paint, layers and layers and layers, and also like flicks a toothbrush onto the surface to get this very realistic skin tone. Just some examples of sculpted busts out of clay. Doug Jack is very famous. He always breaks his pieces up and he changes the proportion on things and he cuts them up and adds cast elements to them. Robert Arneson, also you've seen his work before. He was the UC Davis professor, so he's the one, if you've been on that campus, that did all the eggheads. And if you go to UC Davis, you'll see his prints in the library. And I studied at UC Davis, and the ceramic wing is called TB9. It's very famous, even though it's still a portable. I don't know why they've never made a real ceramic building for them, but it's still a portable. But Arneson taught in there, and now famous Annabeth Rosen teaches in there. And at the time that I was going there, the lab tech, the guy that fired all the kilns and made the glazes, he was Arneson's assistant. So and I was sort of friends with him, so he'd tell me all these Arneson stories. And then one day he said, "Oh, come here, let me show you something." And we went into the glaze room, and he pulled this big shelf out from the wall, and behind the shelf was an Arneson drawing on the wall still. And I don't know why they hide it, probably to protect it. But that's in the glaze room now, but that was Arneson's studio at one point. So kind of famous. I personally don't like his work. I think it's really full of ego, and I don't know. There's just sort of like a pretentiousness to it. And it's funk art. It's funk ceramics, which can be really gaudy and gross. And I'm not super into it, but he's famous and he has made some interesting pieces. I like the work of Akio Takamori much better. These figures are about half life size, and he's Japanese American, and he brings a lot of his culture into his work, and he paints his pieces really graphically. I love this sort of cartoon line. Some anonymous figures just to show you the variety of textures and different patterns and staining, glazing techniques we can talk about when you get back here. Hyper realistic or more exaggerated. Some clay artists will mix their media, so they'll use fabric and sewing. You could deal with contemporary things like tattoo art or contemporary fashion, things that are hip right now. You can leave the surface really chunky, right, and broken up or sort of crumbly looking. Or you could pit it and add stain and color to it, or exaggerate some features to tell a story. I'm having you sculpt your figures on a seat because we're not quite ready to make these figures standing up. This is a little bit more challenging as a clay artist to learn how to do this. So we're not there yet. So you're going to put yours in a seat. So what are we doing for this project? At some point we might do some gesture drawings or sketches to kind of practice drawing the figure, because I'm not sure, some of you might have taken drawing 1 before. We did do some figure drawing in Art 7 if you took my Art 7 class in 7th grade, but it might be a good idea to kind of refresh your ability to draw the figure. You're going to sculpt a full figure, and I want your figure to be human and proportionate, but you can choose to either exaggerate something on the body to give it some type of narrative, or you can add something fantastical, like you could make it a hybrid human animal form. You could add objects to your figure. You could add like wings instead of arms, or like horse legs instead of human legs, something that kind of goes along with your idea and your theme. So your goals really are to sculpt the human form proportionately, but then adding that fantastical element, and you're putting your figure on a chair. So I'm going to go through these images fairly quickly because they're just inspiration. David Hockney is not a clay artist. He is a painter. He's from Britain. He's probably, I'd say, maybe the most famous or most critical painter of this century. Now that is a big statement, I realize that, but his work is prolific, and if you've seen a body, he had a retrospective at the De Young, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, something like that. Incredible work. So why am I talking about this painter all of a sudden? Because he paints seated figures, so just some inspiration. These are all people that he knows, or maybe they're his models, but you get the sense that they're people in his life. They're colorful, they're proportionate, there's some interesting textures in them, positioning, personality for sure in the seated figures. Great textures, great patterns. These are his parents. And then I wanted to share with you Kehinde Wiley's work. He's a Nigerian American artist, mostly famous right now for painting the presidential portrait of Barack Obama for the Smithsonian Portrait Gallery. Amy Sherald painted Michelle Obama, and this is also in the Smithsonian Portrait Gallery. These are the very first African American painters to ever paint a presidential portrait. Here's some more Kehinde Wiley paintings. So you could think about, he uses these backgrounds, these very European wallpapery backgrounds to, I'm not going to get totally into his work, but he takes very traditional European poses from traditional European paintings, and he takes contemporary people and he puts them in there. And sometimes he takes this wallpaper and it overlaps on top. Currently, or I think most recent body of work, he's done a whole series of international paintings of people from all over the world. And he's kind of jumped into the realm of sculpture. There's all this controversy right now about taking down the sculptures that represent, acts of racism and slavery in the United States. And he was recently he was commissioned to create a sculpture of an African American man on a horse battling or in one of the wars. I don't know which war. I should know that. I should look that up for you. So now he's working on these international paintings of very powerful women, tribal women. I love these. These are very photographic too. They're hyper surrealistic. They're very saturated color, but they're very realistic as well. So you guys are going to be working on a sketch of your figure. So here's some examples of Wiley's sketches, Arneson's sketches, and I want your sketch to really inform your sculpture. So why would we sketch before we sculpt? Because it helps us make a plan, right? It helps us get our ideas down on paper. We can draw our idea in the round, right, from different angles. You could see in this Arneson print that he's actually taken Polaroids of himself so that he can see himself from all sides. I don't remember where this is, but I have seen this sculpture in this print. It's somewhere in California. Could be DeYoung, it's not the Crocker. Maybe it is. Has anyone else seen this sculpture? Henry Moore, Figurative Abstract. These are drawings of his pieces. More figurative. Rodin, ink drawings. Beautiful in themselves. Sometimes I like the sketches more than I like the finished sculptures. Some drawings of the kiss over here. Kiki Smith, one of my favorite sculptors. She's a printmaker as well. This piece is, I think it's at the MoMA. It's very creepy, but awesome because she's on the wall like a fly. So you walk up to the wall and you look at her. She's upside down too, and she has this glassy blue eye, and it's just staring at you. Okay. So you might be at this point thinking about, what am I gonna sculpt? What's important to me? So I started digging around and I started thinking about, well, what's important to me right now? What's my demo gonna be for Ceramics 1? And I am gonna demo on Tuesday for you on the drawing part. So you don't have to start that now, but I do want you to start thinking about what you're gonna do and doing a little bit of research. But Shashti, and if anyone is Indian and knows about her and wants to elaborate on this, the reason I'm pulling her in as a reference, and she's not the only one, is that she's a protector of children. And I want to talk a little bit about, I'm going to go into this in more depth when we're doing our demo, but I'm going to mention it now. I'm going to talk a little bit about cultural appropriation and how not to do that. So if I were to take her image and just sculpt her just as I see her in these reference images, right? I'm not Hindu, right? I do not practice Hinduism, but here's some examples of her. But I'm interested in this for several reasons. The biggest reason right now is that my son is Indian. He's of Indian descent from Fiji, and so I'm interested in raising him in a culture that he's part of. That is particularly challenging for me because I am a white woman. So I have to be very conscious and culturally appropriate when I'm sharing these things with him. But then I started thinking about, well, the symbol of being a protector of children. That is what I really love about this, right? So I'm going to look up other representations of this throughout all over the world in history and educate myself first on all of these things. So, and then start thinking about, well, maybe if I create one for myself that is coming from my personal experience and my origins and my beliefs. That's what you need to do to not culturally appropriate from another culture, right? You have to create your own experience and your own art. So then I started thinking about, well, I would want my figure to maybe represent male and female energy, or, so I started thinking about like the Venus of Willendorf. We'll talk about her a little bit. She's a fertility goddess. Here's a Nordic goddess, Lesavik. He is sort of the god of nature. He's a protector of nature. I have this postcard. This is an artwork that was created by just a contemporary woman in a gallery in New Mexico of a mother and child. You have the Pieta, right? Mother Mary and then the baby Jesus. You have this symbol of mother, a protector and child all over the world throughout history. Okay, so there's lots of references for that. So now my job is to make my own from my own experiences. Okay, so that's what I want you to think about. If you're going to be bringing in some cultural references, they need to be rooted and grounded in your beliefs. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So that is the end of this slide presentation. I really appreciate your full attention. Let's look at the time here. Whoops. Something like that. It's 1:25. Class gets out at what? I'm forgetting the 1:45. So what I want you guys to do is kind of disappear for 10 minutes if you want to, and start digging and researching and finding some ideas. You do not need to start your drawings yet. Don't start them until next week when I show you my demo. Okay, and then come back at like 1:35, 1:40-ish to do your checkout. And then you're going to post your notes as well. Naomi?
I kind of have a weird specific question.